I was standing knee-deep in muddy water, staring at what used to be my wetlands, and what Natalie Adams, the HOA president, proudly called her community highway. The irony was brutal. She said the road would connect the neighborhood. Instead, it connected every storm drain straight into my backyard. When I bought this land, I knew every cattail and cypress by name. It was protected ground, a living sponge that absorbed rain and sheltered wildlife. But to Natalie, it was wasted space. She wanted concrete, not conservation. Now the asphalt she poured without permission was cracking under its own arrogance. And as the thunder rolled across the horizon, I realized nature had started to collect its debt. They thought they could pave over nature. Nature had other plans. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more real HOA stories where karma always finds its way. When I first bought the property, I didn't want neighbors, I wanted quiet. 60 acres of open sky, tall grass, and mirrored water. The kind of place where frogs sang louder than traffic, and the wind moved through the cattails like a sigh. It wasn't just land, it was an ecosystem, alive, breathing, self-sustaining. My wetlands, my sanctuary. My name's Thomas Harris, and I'm an environmental consultant. I've spent most of my career telling people what not to build, roads that cut migration paths, housing that sits in flood zones, or driveways that choke natural drainage. You'd think after 25 years in this field I'd be immune to stupidity. But I hadn't met Natalie Adams yet. When I first moved into Willowbend Estates, it was calm. The community was made up mostly of retirees, teachers, a few small business owners. Folks waved when they passed, dropped pies at your door during holidays. My property bordered the southern edge of the neighborhood, a buffer zone of sorts. Most people didn't even realize my land wasn't HOA property. That changed the day Natalie became president. She arrived like a campaign poster, come to life, blonde curls, bright blazers, and a voice loud enough to command any meeting. Her background, real estate marketing. Her philosophy, if you can see it, pave it. At her first HOA assembly, she stood before a crowd of polite residents in folding chairs and PowerPointed her dream into existence. Imagine, she said, a beautiful community access road cutting through that old swamp behind Thomas's property. A scenic shortcut connecting the north gate to the highway, people murmured approvingly. To them it sounded convenient progress even. To me it sounded like ecological suicide. When the meeting ended, I caught her outside. "Miss Adams," I said evenly, "that old swamp is a federally protected wetland. It filters runoff, prevents flooding, and keeps your basements dry. You start digging there, you're not just breaking the law, you're asking for a disaster." She smiled that politician's smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "I appreciate your passion, Thomas, but I've seen the satellite maps. It's just a little soggy land. A culvert and some gravel will fix that right up." "It's not soggy land," I corrected. "It's a hydrological system. It's meant to absorb water, not divert it." Her smirk didn't waver. "Well, maybe you and your frogs can keep a corner of it. But the community has to move forward." Forward, I thought. Straight into the floodplain. The next few weeks passed quietly enough. I thought maybe she'd drop the idea once she realized how expensive and complicated federal permitting could be. You can't just dump concrete wherever you like, not with environmental oversight, not with protected species in the mix. But Natalie Adams wasn't the quitting type. It started with letters. Thin white envelopes from the HOA appearing in my mailbox every few days. "Notice of violation," they read. "Your vegetation exceeds acceptable height limits. Standing water may pose a mosquito hazard. Failure to maintain property appearance in accordance with community standards." I laughed out loud at first. How do you maintain a wetland mow? The herons chlorinate the frogs. But then came the fines: $100, $250, $500. Repeat violation, overgrown vegetation. I realized she wasn't just poking. She was building a case. I sent formal responses with attached maps, citing the Wetland Conservation Act, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and county zoning maps. I attached my professional license copies of my environmental survey, and even the Army Corps of Engineers documentation that labeled the area as protected flood retention land. I might as well have sent her a bedtime story. 2 weeks later, she called a special meeting to discuss infrastructure improvements. The room was full, curious neighbors, free donuts, a few city representatives. Natalie stood at the front like a CEO unveiling a new product. "Friends," she began, "we've all seen how dangerous that south exit is. The traffic, the blind, turn the delay for emergency vehicles. I propose we solve it once and for all with a new community access road right through that underused section of land." Underused. That was her favorite word for mine. Hands went up, some curious, some skeptical. "Won't that cost a lot?" someone asked. "Oh, not at all," she said, flashing that confident grin. My husband's company has offered to handle the construction at a discount. I raised my hand. Madam President, that land is not part of Willowbend Estates. It's private property under federal protection. She turned to me with mock sympathy. Thomas, with all due respect, the HOA records show an easement zone right through that area. That's impossible, I said flatly. There's no easement. I checked the county recorder myself. Well, she shrugged. Maybe your files are outdated. Ours are more recent. I stepped forward, holding up my own stack of papers, the original deed survey maps and official wetlands certification. These are legal documents signed by the county engineer in 1982. You start digging, you'll be violating state and federal law. Laughter rippled through the room. Natalie let it linger before saying sweetly, Thomas, no one wants to harm your little pond. We're just talking about community progress. Don't make it personal. It becomes personal, I said when you bulldoze my land. Her smile froze for half a second before she regained her poise. Let's vote, shall we? Hands went up, mostly her allies, the ones she'd promised increased property values and better access. The motion passed in minutes. Natalie turned to me with a look of triumph. See democracy in action. I stared back. You just voted to break the law. She tilted her head. Then I guess the law will have to catch up. That night I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents, half-drunk coffee, and a rising sense of dread. I dealt with ignorant clients before, but never with someone who thought ignorance was power. I could see where this was heading. The letters, the fines, the community project talk she was building, momentum getting residents emotionally invested. Once they saw bulldozers move, they'd never question whether it was legal. They'd just assume it was approved. And when the rains came, as they always did in late spring, all that gravel and concrete would trap the runoff instead of absorbing it. The water would back up. The culverts would overflow. The entire subdivision could become a lake. All because Natalie Adams thought nature was an inconvenience. 2 days later, a knock came at my door. It was old Bill, my neighbor of 20 years. Retired electrician, gruff voice, heart of gold. He stood there holding his baseball cap mud on his boots. Tom, he said quietly, you better come take a look. He led me down the dirt path to the edge of the wetland. Fresh orange stakes dotted the ground survey markers. They were out here this morning, he said. 2 trucks, some guys in vests. Said they were with Adams Development Group. They pulled out your old marker posts, said the area's been rezoned. My stomach dropped. Rezoned by who? Bill spat on the ground. Didn't say. Just laughed when I asked. I stared at the stakes, glinting in the afternoon Sunday. The last time I saw those lines moved was when my father walked me through this land 40 years ago, showing where the marsh began and where the high ground ended. Now they were gone, replaced by fluorescent lies. I took a slow breath, fighting the heat rising in my chest. All right, I said quietly. If Natalie wants a road, she's about to learn how heavy paperwork can get. Bill grinned faintly. You're gonna make it ugly for her, ain't ya? No, I said, grabbing my camera bag from the truck. I'm gonna make it legal. He laughed low and gravelly. Same thing in her world. That night, I began documenting everything, every stake, every map, every letter. I set up trail cameras at the property line, logged timestamps, and marked GPS coordinates. The fight hadn't officially started yet, but the opening move was clear. And as I uploaded the footage, watching the blinking red light on the screen, I caught my reflection, tired eyes, clenched jaw, rain tapping against the window. In that moment, I knew one thing for certain. Natalie Adams had declared war on nature. And I was going to let nature fight back. It started quietly, the way most wars do, with paperwork. 3 weeks after the survey stakes appeared, I received my 3rd HOA violation notice. The reason this time, failure to maintain visual uniformity. Whatever that meant. The fine, $750. Natalie's signature stamped in blue ink like a declaration of dominance. I called the HOA office. A chipper voice answered Willowbend Estates. This is Janet. This is Thomas Harris. I just received another violation notice. Oh, Mr. Harris, she said with mock sympathy. Yes, those are automatically generated. The board's been reviewing all properties bordering community land. Community land? I repeated slowly. You mean my land? There was a pause. Then carefully. Well, the new boundary survey does show an expanded easement zone. President Adams said she discussed it with you. I laughed dryly. She discussed it with my mailbox. And I hung up. That night, I sat on my porch as dusk swallowed the marsh. The frogs were louder than ever, maybe sensing something unnatural was coming. I opened my laptop and began filing formal complaints. One to the county zoning department, another to the State Environmental Protection Agency, and one directly to the Army Corps of Engineers. I attached maps, timestamped photos, and GPS coordinates. If Natalie wanted to play bureaucratic chicken, I'd bring the federal government to the table. By the end of the week, she'd gone from passive-aggressive to just plain aggressive. Flyers appeared in mailboxes titled, "Clearing the Swamp for the Good of Willowbend." They painted me as an obstructionist, a man clinging to a mosquito pit blocking vital infrastructure. There was even a cartoon me with a fishing hat and binoculars glaring from a puddle while neighbors waited in traffic. The caption read, "One man's swamp is everyone's problem." I wanted to be angry, but honestly, I admired the propaganda effort. She knew how to manipulate perception, make herself the visionary, and me the villain. At the next HOA meeting, I decided to attend. The community hall was packed. Some came for curiosity, others for free cookies. Natalie stood front and center, a slideshow already glowing behind her, aerial renderings of a gleaming new community connector road. "Good evening, everyone," she began, voice bright and polished. "I know there's been some confusion about our infrastructure project, so I'd like to clarify. This road will not only reduce congestion, but also increase property values by up to 15%. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. She had them eating from her manicured hand. Then she pointed to a slide, a map with a red line cutting right through my wetland. "This underutilized area currently holds stagnant water and poses breeding risks for pests. With proper drainage and paving, it'll finally serve the community." I stood. "You mean destroy the community's natural flood control system?" Natalie turned, smile unwavering. "Thomas, how wonderful of you to join us. Everyone, this is the property owner who's graciously hosting our road expansion." "Hosting," I repeated. "You're trespassing." A few heads turned. Some neighbors looked uneasy. Others avoided eye contact. I held up a folder thick with papers. "For the record, this land is privately owned, federally protected, and critical to our watershed. You pave it, you're inviting disaster." Natalie chuckled, glancing at the audience. "Friends, don't be alarmed. Mr. Harris is very passionate about his, ecosystem. But our engineers have approved the plan." "Engineers?" I asked. "Plural. Of course," she said, waving toward the back. Two men in polo shirts and shiny boots nodded. "Certified contractors. They've built dozens of roads." "Contractors aren't environmental engineers," I shot back. "They're paid to build, not protect." Natalie stepped closer, her perfume cloying under the fluorescent lights. "Thomas, progress sometimes requires sacrifice. You'll see when this road is finished, the community will thank you." I locked eyes with her. "When it floods, they'll thank me." Her smile twitched. "You sound like a man rooting for disaster." "I'm a man predicting it." That was the turning point. The meeting dissolved into shouting supporters clapping for Natalie, skeptics murmuring about fines, and me standing in the middle holding documents no one wanted to read. Finally, she slammed the gavel down. "Motion to approve Phase 1 of construction." Hands shot up. Majority. The gavel struck wood again. Motion passed. Just like that democracy bulldozed reason. The following morning, I woke to the grinding snarl of machinery. A bulldozer was parked 20 feet from my fence line, its blade already pressing into the soft mud. Workers in neon vests shouted over each other. And there she was, Natalie Adams, standing beside her husband, clipboard in hand, sunglasses glinting. I stormed out the door boots, sinking into wet soil. "Get off my property," one of the workers pointed at Natalie. "Talk to her, sir. We're just following orders." She turned, smile syrupy as ever. "Thomas, so good to see you. We're starting preliminary grading today. On my land," she waved a folded paper. "Under easement authority. You were notified." I snatched it from her. It was an HOA document, not a legal permit, full of typos, no official seals, no signatures from any government office. "This isn't worth the ink it's printed with." "Maybe not to you," she said lightly, "but the community voted. You can't stop progress." I felt my pulse hammering. "You have no jurisdiction here, Natalie. This isn't your playground." "Then sue me," she said, walking away. So I did, or at least I started the process. By noon, I was on the phone with Evelyn, an environmental lawyer I'd worked with years ago. She listened as I laid out the entire situation, her tone going from amused to horrified. "Thomas," she said, "they can't do that. Wetlands are under federal regulation. You need to file an injunction immediately. I already emailed the Army Corps. They said it'll take a week to review." "A week," she sighed. "That's 6 bulldozer days. You need documentation, everything." "I have photos, videos, survey data." "Good. Keep filming. You'll want evidence for both the lawsuit and the environmental impact report." When I hung up, the sound of engines was still echoing through the marsh. I climbed the hill behind my house and started recording the machines, pushing into the reeds, the water clouding with mud, the trees creaking as roots were torn from the soil. One of the workers yelled over the noise. "You might want to move your truck, sir. We're widening this section." "This section," I said, coldly, "isn't yours to widen." He shrugged. "Orders from the boss lady." I zoomed the camera in on Natalie. She was laughing with a county inspector, one I recognized from a recent zoning appeal. Suddenly things clicked. Connections favors money under the table. This wasn't ignorance, it was arrogance weaponized by influence. By sunset, a third of the wetland was gone. Decades-old cypress trees lay split open like bones. The natural drainage basin, the heart of the ecosystem, was filled with gravel and compacted dirt. I walked the perimeter with a flashlight, water sloshing at my ankles, and muttered to myself, "You're building a dam, Natalie, not a road." I planted new measuring stakes, each labeled with a date and water level. If the storm season went the way, forecasts predicted the data would speak louder than any courtroom argument. But as I returned home, I noticed something strange. The marsh's usual trickle of overflow had stopped completely. The new embankment was blocking the outflow channel, the natural escape route for rainwater. They just turned my land into a bathtub. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Day 1 of construction. Drainage obstructed. Natural flow severed. Expect water rise during next rainfall. HOA liable for all damages." I stared at the words until they blurred. I'd always believed that truth backed by evidence would prevail. But in Natalie's world, truth was just another speed bump. Still, I wasn't beaten. Not yet. Tomorrow, I'd file the injunction, contact the press, and send the footage to every environmental board in the state. Because if Natalie Adams wanted to build her empire on a swamp, I'd make sure the first storm would remind her exactly whose kingdom this was. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of engines rumbling across the wetlands like thunder rolling under the earth. For a second, I thought it was another storm forming early, until the beeping of heavy machinery cut through the air. I ran to the porch, coffee still in hand, and froze. They were back. 4 bulldozers, 2 dump trucks, and an excavator, all crawling over the marsh like yellow metal locusts. Workers in neon vests shouted instructions, pushing gravel and sand into what used to be a living ecosystem. The cattails that once swayed like sentinels were gone. The water was gone. The frogs, the herons, the dragonflies gone. At the center of it all stood Natalie Adams, arms crossed, wearing oversized sunglasses and a white hard hat that said HOA Infrastructure Lead. Her husband, Paul Adams, stood beside her, gesturing proudly toward a blue tarp marked with survey lines. I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't even bother to grab a jacket, I just marched down the hill. "Get those trucks off my land," I shouted over the engines. One of the foremen, a broad man in a neon vest, turned and pointed his clipboard at me. "Sir, you're trespassing on an active job site." "Trespassing? This is my property," I yelled, my voice shaking with disbelief. Natalie turned slowly, lowering her sunglasses. "Thomas," she said smoothly, like she was greeting an old friend at brunch, "you're interrupting official HOA work." "Official," I barked. "You're building on protected wetlands without a single permit. This isn't just illegal, it's insane." She smiled, too calm. "We have all the documentation we need." She held up a stack of printed papers. I snatched them from her hand. It was the same nonsense I'd seen before. HOA Infrastructure Initiative. No signatures, no county seals, nothing but a fancy header, and her own signature scrawled across the bottom. "You forged this," I said. "Strong accusation," she replied, folding her arms. "Maybe you should let the courts decide." I glared at the bulldozers. "You're destroying an ecosystem. Do you even understand what that means? This wetland absorbs over 50,000 gallons of floodwater per inch of rainfall. You're turning it into a bowl." "Thomas," she said sweetly, "you've made your point. But the board has voted. Democracy wins." I took a step closer. Democracy doesn't override federal law. Her smile didn't move, but her voice hardened. "You don't want to make this personal. It already is." I called the sheriff's office, my phone shaking in my hand. "This is an emergency," I said. "They're bulldozing my property, my protected wetlands." The dispatcher sighed like she'd heard it all before. "Is anyone in physical danger, sir?" "Yes," I snapped. "The environment." There was a pause. "So, no." Within 20 minutes, a county deputy rolled up. Deputy Harris, a guy I'd met a few times at local meetings. He stepped out of the cruiser looking more bored than alarmed. "What's going on here, Mr. Harris?" he asked, no relation. "They're trespassing," I said, pointing at the construction crew. "That's my land. They're filling a wetland. That's a federal violation." Natalie walked up, all smiles. "Deputy, so glad you're here. We're just working on an HOA-approved access road." He's been confused about the boundaries. Deputy Harris glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable. You got paperwork for this. She handed him the same forged documents. He flipped through them, frowned, then shrugged. Looks official enough to me. It's not, I shouted. Check the parcel map. Lot 27B is mine. I have the deed right here. I pulled it from my folder. He looked at it, scratched his head, then sighed. Sir, I'm not a surveyor. This sounds like a civil dispute. You'll have to take it to court. So you're not going to stop them, not unless someone's getting hurt. I laughed bitterly. You mean besides the entire neighborhood when this floods? He gave me a helpless look and walked back to his cruiser. Natalie turned to me with a smirk. See, the law's on my side. No, I said quietly. The law's just running late. That night, I worked until 2 a.m., filing emergency injunction requests to the State Department of Environmental Quality and the Army Corps of Engineers. Evelyn, my lawyer, called me on speakerphone. You've got the evidence right, she said. I've got everything, I replied. Photos, GPS, data, video footage. I even logged the water level drop. Good, she said. Keep documenting. The agencies move slow, but when they act, they hit hard. And Thomas, yeah, don't confront her again without a witness. People like Natalie, they'll twist your words into threats. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion pressing down on me. She's already twisting the land. The following morning, I woke to the sound of chainsaws. By the time I reached the wetlands, the cypress trees, some over a century old, were gone. Their trunks lay in heaps, bleeding sap into the mud. The air smelled like wet sawdust and diesel. I filmed everything, narrating into the camera. Day 2. Illegal construction continues. Native vegetation destroyed. Natural drainage channel obstructed. A worker yelled, "Hey buddy, you can't film here." "I can when it's my land," I shot back. One of them, younger, nervous, muttered, "He's right though. The markers don't line up with the HOA line." The foreman snapped, "Shut it and keep digging." Natalie appeared again, wearing heels now, like she was posing for a magazine. "Thomas," she called cheerfully, "I hope you're documenting. I'd hate for you to miss our ribbon-cutting ceremony." I glared at her. "When this road floods your house, I'll make you a plaque." She laughed. "You really think water scares me?" "No," I said. "You should be scared of gravity." By the end of the week, the wetlands looked like a war zone. The natural ponds were buried under 3 feet of gravel. The water table dropped nearly a foot. The herons stopped returning at dusk. And yet Natalie strutted around like a queen, waving to neighbors, boasting about the new access road. She even held a groundbreaking photo op, a few HOA members with golden shovels smiling as if they'd discovered electricity. The local paper printed it, "Willowbend HOA expands connectivity." I wanted to scream. Instead, I clipped the article and filed it as evidence. Because I knew something Natalie didn't. She'd just built a dam in a floodplain. Late one night, rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight, trudging through the muck toward the construction site. Water pooled where it never had before, swirling in strange eddies. The roadbed, still unfinished, blocked the natural outflow. I marked the water height 6 inches above normal, after only 2 hours of rainfall. By dawn, it had climbed to 10. This was proof. Physical, measurable proof that the road was obstructing the floodplain. I emailed Evelyn the data, copying the county's environmental officer, and wrote, "When the big storm hits, this will be catastrophic. The HOA has built a barrier. Water will find another path straight through the neighborhood." 2 days later, Natalie threw a celebration barbecue right on top of the new asphalt. Music banners, smiling residents, all congratulating her vision. She even had the nerve to invite me. I went anyway. I wanted witnesses. She saw me approach and raised her plastic cup. Thomas cared to toast to progress. I looked around at the people laughing and eating under the banner that read, "The future of Willowbend." "Sure," I said. "To the future." She clinked my cup. "See, you're coming around." I smiled thinly. "Just remember, Natalie, every dam breaks eventually." Her grin faltered. For a second, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes, then the music swelled and she turned back to her adoring crowd. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the lightning crawl across the clouds. The marsh, what was left of it, lay still, silent, unnatural. Even the frogs had stopped singing. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Phase complete. Hydrology compromised. Flood inevitable. They've built the weapon that will destroy them." I set the pen down and whispered into the dark, "Let's see if progress can swim." For nearly a month, the so-called community access road stood like a scar across my property, dry, gray, and humming with misplaced pride. The HOA newsletter bragged about successful completion, complete with photos of Natalie in a hard hat holding golden scissors, smiling like she'd personally conquered nature. But the truth sat buried just beneath the surface. Tons of compacted gravel trapping the natural flow of water sealed under asphalt like a coffin lid. I knew what was coming. The local news had started running weather warnings, tropical depression forming in the Gulf projected path, uncertain. Then the next day, storm system strengthening, heavy rainfall expected. A few days later, the headline changed again, unprecedented rain event likely for central counties. I'd seen this before. Storms like this don't just visit wetlands, they reclaim them. I spent that week preparing. I walked every inch of my property checking the small drainage pipes I'd installed years ago, clearing debris, stacking sandbags along the lowest edge. I built temporary channels with wooden planks and bags of gravel. Primitive maybe, but better than the HOA's engineering. Old Bill came by to help. He leaned on his cane, squinting toward the black asphalt slicing through the marsh. "Looks like a dam to me," he muttered. "That's because it is," I said. "They think they built a road, but all they did was block nature's bloodstream." He chuckled. And when the blood backs up, I looked at the sky already bruised with incoming clouds. Then the neighborhood bleeds. By Thursday, the first drops fell. Natalie, of course, posted a triumphant message on the community board. "Don't panic, the new road has advanced drainage systems designed to handle heavy rain. Trust the process." Advanced drainage. She meant 2 metal culverts her husband had installed after I'd pointed out the blocked waterway. The problem was, they were positioned 3 feet above the natural flow line. Water doesn't drain uphill. I replied under her post with a simple message: "Water doesn't negotiate, Natalie. It remembers." Within an hour, my comment was deleted and I was banned from the HOA forum. Typical. That night, the rain grew steady, a slow percussion against the roof. I sat by the window, sipping coffee, my camera trained on the wetlands. Every 30 minutes, I logged the water level on my gauge. Midnight up 2 inches, 2 a.m. up 6, 4 a.m. nearly a foot higher. I sent the data to Evelyn, who replied with a single line: "If this continues, call the state emergency office immediately." I didn't sleep. By dawn, the neighborhood chat lit up with the first complaints: front yards flooding, water pooling near mailboxes, storm drains overflowing. And yet Natalie posted another message: "Minor runoff all under control. The new road is holding beautifully." She wasn't wrong about one thing: it was holding too well. That morning, I went to check the situation for myself. The rain hadn't stopped. Sheets of water poured from the sky, turning the air into mist. I sloshed through ankle-deep puddles until I reached the road. The asphalt shimmered black under the storm, with water pressing against its edges like a rising tide. The culverts gurgled uselessly, the flow was entirely blocked. And then I saw it on the far side of the road. The water in my wetlands had turned into a lake. It was rising fast, spreading outward, seeking space that didn't exist anymore. I filmed everything: the blocked drainage, the standing waves, the sheer force of water hitting the embankment. Old Bill pulled up in his pickup window, cracked just enough to yell, "She's about to get her baptism." "I know," I said. "But when that breaks, it's not just her house that'll drown." He nodded grimly and drove off to warn the neighbors. That afternoon, the sky went green, that sickly, unnatural shade that always comes before disaster. The local meteorologist's voice crackled through the radio: "Flash flood warning now, in effect for Willowbend County. Estimated rainfall totals between 10 and 14 inches over the next 12 hours. I grabbed my waterproof drone case and launched it from the porch. From above, the picture was horrifying. The so-called access road cut through the landscape like a black levee. On one side, rising brown water. On the other, neat suburban lawns and shiny new homes sitting on slightly lower ground. The difference in elevation was maybe 2 feet. 2 feet that would decide who stayed dry and who didn't. I captured footage of the trapped water straining against the road's edge, waves lapping like fists on a door. And in that footage, I saw its small cracks forming in the asphalt near the midpoint. Pressure lines. The dam was holding, but it wouldn't for long. By 7 p.m., the power flickered twice and died. The neighborhood plunged into darkness, broken only by lightning flashing across the sky. Rain hammered the windows like gravel. I lit a lantern and checked the gauges again. 3 feet higher, 4, 5. The wetlands were now a full-blown reservoir, and the road was the only thing standing between the water and the rest of Willowbend. My phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn Thomas, state agency: "Confirmed receipt of your complaint. They're sending inspectors next week." I laughed out loud. Next week. There might not be a neighborhood left by next week. At 9 p.m., there was a loud knock on my door. I opened it to find Deputy Harris soaked to the bone, flashlight in hand. "Mr. Harris," he said over the roar of rain, "we've got flooding all over the north end. HOA asked if you could open your drainage channels to help divert flow." I stared at him. They built a dam on my property, and now they want me to bail them out. He sighed. Look, I'm just passing the message. They say your land's higher, you might save a few homes. I stepped outside, water swirling around my boots. Deputy, if I open my drainage now, the entire pressure load hits at once. The moment that asphalt gives way, it'll hit like a tsunami. He frowned. You serious? Dead serious? You tell Natalie to evacuate everyone south of the road right now. He hesitated, torn between orders and reason. Finally, he nodded and jogged back to his cruiser. By 10 p.m., the rain became a roar. The wind howled through the trees, snapping branches. My drone feed showed water cresting the top of the asphalt, spilling tiny rivulets across its surface. The inevitable was seconds away. I started the camera, speaking to it like a confession day, 41 since construction began. The HOA ignored every warning. The water level has reached critical height. Any minute now, the barrier will fail. This is no longer a prediction, it's physics. A flash of lightning split the sky. Thunder cracked so violently the ground trembled. Then it happened. A low groan, like the earth itself exhaling. The asphalt buckled, then fractured, a jagged seam splitting open. Water erupted through the gap, tearing the road apart like paper. The dam burst. A wall of brown water surged forward, roaring down the slope into Willowbend. Streetlights disappeared, one by one, as the flood consumed the neighborhood. I could hear screams, shouts, alarms, car horns blaring before being silenced by the rush. Through the rain, I saw a distant flash, a white SUV half-submerged, spinning as it was swept into the current. Natalie's SUV. She'd always said she wasn't afraid of water. I wondered if she was afraid now. By midnight, the storm had reached its peak. My house, built on slightly higher ground, stood surrounded by water but still dry inside. I watched through the window as the HOA clubhouse, the same one where Natalie had mocked me, crumbled under the pressure and washed away. Nature didn't roar in triumph, it just reclaimed what was hers. I sat down, soaking, wet heart pounding. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Outside, the flood swallowed Willowbend whole. And, in the distance, under the endless thunder, I could almost hear Natalie's voice echoing from that first meeting. One man can't stop progress. Maybe not. But one storm just did. The sound that woke me wasn't thunder this time, it was silence. The kind that follows catastrophe, where the air itself holds its breath. Then, through the blackness, came the distant wail of sirens. I opened my front door and stared into a nightmare. What used to be a road was now a river, a muddy, violent torrent tearing through the heart of Willowbend Estates. Streetlights flickered underwater like ghostly candles. Cars bobbed in the current like forgotten toys. Whole fences drifted by, tangled with branches and trash cans. The highway Natalie had built was gone, ripped open down the center, chunks of asphalt floating like broken ice sheets. Water poured through the breach with a fury I'd never seen before, the sound like an unending roar of collapsing earth. I pulled on my waders and stepped out into the flood. The rain still fell, but softer now, as if the storm had already won and was only cleaning up the mess. I waded through waist-deep water toward my truck, parked on the higher gravel. Its headlights reflected eerie patterns on the flood's surface. When I looked to the left, I could barely recognize the neighborhood. Houses that once looked identical, white siding, trimmed lawns, garden flags, were now dark silhouettes, half-submerged water curling over porches. Then I saw movement, a flashlight flickering from a second-story window across the street. Someone shouting for help. "Hey!" I called, voice hoarse. "Anyone in there?" A man leaned out the window, clutching a drenched blanket around his shoulders. "We can't get out," he yelled. "My wife's trapped in the back bedroom. The current between us was too strong." I grabbed a fallen fence plank and used it to push myself forward inch by inch until I reached his porch roof. I climbed up, panting, and peered through the open window. Inside the house was chaos, water swirling across the floor, furniture floating like dead fish. The woman was crying, clutching a soaked photo album. I helped them climb to the attic, cutting a vent hole in the ceiling with my pocket knife. The rain hit my face again as we emerged onto the roof. The man looked around, stunned. "I don't understand," he murmured. "They said the new road would protect us." I almost laughed. "That road trapped you." Below us, the destruction spread like ink. The flood followed gravity's call, rolling through the cul-de-sacs, lifting SUVs and mailboxes alike. The HOA's beloved community garden was gone, replaced by a swirling whirlpool that sucked down mulch benches and ceramic gnomes. Then came the sound of splitting wood. A house down the street, one of the newer builds, collapsed at the foundation, the entire structure tilting before the current claimed it. For a brief second, lightning illuminated the scene, and there, perched on her porch roof, clinging to a half-toppled column, was Natalie Adams. Her white blazer was soaked gray. Her hair clung to her face. Even from a distance, I could see the disbelief written all over her, the kind of shock that only comes when arrogance meets physics. She was screaming something, but the wind drowned it out. I yelled across the flood. "You still think it's just a puddle, Natalie?" Her voice cracked. "Thomas, help me." I wanted to say no. Every part of me wanted to turn my back and let karma finish the job. But watching her cling to that roof beam surrounded by the destruction she caused, I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was survival. I tied a rope from my shoulder harness to a chimney vent and threw the other end toward her. "Grab it." She tried, missed, then tried again. The second time she caught it. "Hold tight," I shouted, bracing myself. The current was pulling her house apart piece by piece. I pulled until my arms burned. Slowly, painfully, she crossed the current, half swimming, half crawling. When she reached my roof, she collapsed beside me, gasping. We sat in silence for a long time, just watching her kingdom sink beneath the flood. "I warned you," I said, finally, voice flat. She didn't answer at first. Her mascara streaked like black rivers down her face. I thought the engineers." "You mean your husband?" I snapped. "He's a contractor, Natalie. He builds driveways, not dams." She shuddered. "I didn't think it would be this bad." I gestured toward the chaos below. "That's the thing about nature. It doesn't care what you think." Her shoulders shook. For the first time, the mighty Natalie Adams looked small, a wet, trembling figure who'd mistaken control for understanding. By sunrise, the rain finally stopped. The storm clouds retreated east, leaving behind a silence broken only by dripping water and distant sirens. The floodwaters were already receding, slowly, unevenly, carving new channels where lawns used to be. My wetlands, which had once been dismissed as useless swamp, now shimmered like a mirror in the morning light, still intact, still absorbing. The rest of Willowbend wasn't so lucky. The drone footage I took that morning was surreal. The main road collapsed into two giant craters. The HOA clubhouse, once Natalie's pride, was reduced to matchsticks. Half the homes near the lower cul-de-sac were uninhabitable. Cars lay piled like driftwood at the community entrance. When emergency services finally reached us by boat, they found Natalie sitting on my porch steps wrapped in a blanket. She didn't speak when the rescuers asked questions. She just stared at the broken horizon. One of the rescuers, a young firefighter, turned to me. "What happened here, sir?" I looked at the twisted asphalt behind him. "They built a highway through a wetland." He blinked. "That's not allowed." "Exactly," I said. Over the next few days, the scale of destruction became national news. Helicopters circled overhead, cameras capturing the drowned suburb. Reporters stood knee-deep in muddy water, reciting the same lines. Local homeowners say the new HOA access road collapsed during record rainfall, redirecting floodwaters into residential streets. I watched the broadcasts from my living room generator, humming, coffee in hand. Every news anchor called it a freak accident. But I knew better. It wasn't freakish, it was inevitable. The county engineers eventually arrived to inspect the damage. One of them, a tall man in a yellow vest, approached me while I was documenting the debris line. "You're Thomas Harris, right? You're the one who filed those reports." "Yeah," I said, "weeks before the storm." He sighed, flipping through a clipboard. "You weren't wrong. The road created a total hydrological block. The pressure buildup was massive. When it failed, it released the entire retention load in one go." "In English," I said. He looked at the wreckage. "They turned your wetland into a water bomb." 2 days later, federal investigators showed up, the Army Corps of Engineers, EPA, FEMA, all with notebooks and cameras. They took my footage, my reports, and my logs. One of them, a stern woman with a badge, said quietly, "Mr. Harris, this evidence is going to be very important. Whoever approved this construction will face serious consequences." I looked toward what was left of Natalie's house, half collapsed, surrounded by police tape. She was sitting outside with a clipboard of her own, trying to explain herself to a pair of reporters. From where I stood, I could hear her voice trembling as she said, "We were just trying to help the community. We didn't know." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, the floodwaters finally drained completely. I walked the perimeter of my property under the pale moonlight. The wetlands had survived, scarred but alive. The reeds were bent, the mud deep, but the water was flowing again, free and steady. I knelt by the old bridge and dipped my hand into the cool, dark current. "You held the line," I whispered. "You always do." Behind me, the ruined neighborhood stretched like a warning, roofs, caved mailboxes, twisted, and silence heavy as guilt. Nature hadn't just punished them, it had taught them. And as for me, I realized something else. I didn't need revenge. I had reality. The water had done what I never could. It forced everyone to see the truth. When I finally went inside the news, Anchor's voice echoed faintly from the radio. Officials have confirmed that unauthorized construction by the Willowbend HOA contributed to catastrophic flooding. Multiple lawsuits are expected. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Karma, it turned out, had perfect timing. When the rain finally stopped, Willowbend Estates looked like a war zone. The drone footage that once showed perfect rows of homes and trimmed lawns now revealed a shattered grid of mud debris and silence. The HOA highway was completely gone, a gaping wound through the landscape torn open from end to end. The asphalt lay in twisted chunks, some lodged in tree branches, others piled at odd angles like broken bones. The air smelled of wet earth, diesel, and loss. I stood at the edge of the wreckage that morning, my boots sinking into sludge, notebook in hand. Every few feet I took a photo, measured, logged. Documentation had become second nature by now. Part habit, part therapy. But this time, I wasn't doing it for myself. I was doing it for everyone who had refused to listen until it was too late. The storm had made its own argument, and nature had signed it in floodwater. 2 days after the flood, county engineers arrived in bright orange jackets, setting up temporary fences and surveying the damage. The lead engineer, a tall woman named Marianne Cho, approached me while I was taking water samples near the destroyed culvert. "You're Thomas Harris, right?" she asked, flipping through a clipboard filled with printouts. "You're the one who filed the wetland complaints." I nodded. "Filed, documented, begged, take your pick." She exhaled sharply. "I've read your reports. You were right about everything. The road they built acted as a containment barrier. Once the water breached, it multiplied the discharge velocity. It's one of the worst design failures I've ever seen." "I wouldn't call it a design failure," I said, watching a frog hop back toward the slowly refilling marsh. "More like arrogance in asphalt form." She almost smiled. "That's going in my report." By evening, the county had cordoned off half the neighborhood. News vans lined the remaining dry street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like flowers reaching for light. Journalists in rain boots trudged through the mud, narrating their segments about an HOA project gone wrong. One camera crew approached me as I was loading my drone gear into the truck. "Mr. Harris," a reporter called out, "you're the environmental consultant who warned them right." I hesitated. I didn't want to turn this into a performance. But I also knew silence had gotten us here in the first place. "That's right," I said. "Can you tell our viewers what went wrong?" I looked straight into the camera. They built a highway through a wetland. The HOA ignored environmental law, basic hydrology, and common sense. I told them it would flood. They called me a doomsayer. Turns out I was optimistic. The clip aired that night, and by morning it had gone viral. Within 48 hours, the story exploded across national media. Headlines screamed, "HOA highway causes catastrophic flood, homeowners demand answers." Willowbend president accused of forging permits. Nature fights back, one man's warning ignored. Natalie Adams became a household name for all the wrong reasons. When investigators from the EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, and State Environmental Agency descended on Willowbend, I provided everything: photos, timestamps, recorded meetings, even the deleted HOA posts I'd archived. One agent, a stern man with gray hair and mirrored sunglasses, flipped through the folders on my table and said, "You built a better case than most of our field teams." "Years of frustration make you thorough," I replied. They stayed for 3 days, collecting samples, measuring water tables, inspecting the destroyed culverts. When they left, the verdict was clear: multiple violations, falsified zoning maps, illegal land alteration, destruction of federally protected wetlands, and obstruction of natural flood channels. The fines alone totaled $1.2 million. But that wasn't the real punishment. The HOA's insurance company announced it would refuse all coverage, citing illegal construction and gross negligence. The board panicked. Members began turning on each other. I heard snippets from the chaos, angry phone calls, threats, resignations, and at the center of it all was Natalie. She tried to spin the narrative, claimed her husband had handled the paperwork, claimed the storm was a once-in-a-century event no one could predict. But the evidence didn't lie. My drone footage showed her standing at the site directing workers. My recordings from the HOA meeting captured her dismissing the warnings. When the county attorney filed charges, fraud, forgery, and reckless endangerment, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how fast her supporters vanished. The same neighbors who once cheered her progress now marched to her house demanding refunds, shouting through the mud-caked streets. Someone even spray-painted Nature One across her garage door. Within a week, she and her husband filed for bankruptcy. One morning, about a month after the flood, I was sitting on my porch repairing a water sensor when a familiar car pulled into the driveway, a county vehicle. Deputy Harris stepped out, looking sheepish. "Morning, Tom," he said. I gave him a nod. "Morning, Deputy. You here to find me for having too much grass again?" He chuckled awkwardly. "Not this time. I just wanted to apologize for what," he rubbed the back of his neck. "When you called that day, when they were bulldozing, I should have done more. I could have pushed harder, gotten the county surveyors out here sooner. I didn't think it'd end like this." I studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "Nobody ever thinks it will, until it does." He nodded, eyes downcast. "You saved lives, you know. If you hadn't warned people that night," I shrugged. "I just told them what the water already knew." By the third week, the cleanup had begun. Excavators pulled chunks of asphalt from the wetlands while restoration crews worked to rebuild the drainage. The Army Corps set up temporary pumps to redirect standing water back into proper channels. It was strange, watching people fix the thing I'd spent months trying to protect from being broken. Evelyn, my lawyer, visited the site one afternoon. "You're practically a local legend now," she said, smiling faintly. "The wetland guy who took down an HOA?" "Not exactly the title I wanted," I said. "Maybe not, but you've given people a playbook. Every property owner fighting overreach is quoting your case. You'll be cited in environmental law textbooks." I looked over the marsh where cranes were removing the last fragments of road. The water shimmered under the sun, reeds already sprouting green again. "I don't care about citations," I said. "I just want this place to breathe again." As weeks passed, nature began to heal. The frogs returned first, then the egrets. The water cleared, flowing gently through the channels I'd mapped years ago. It was as if the land itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. The same couldn't be said for Natalie. She faced civil suits from over 30 homeowners, criminal charges from the state, and a public reputation that disintegrated overnight. Her husband's contracting license was revoked. The last time I saw her was during a televised hearing, pale, exhausted, eyes hollow. When asked if she took responsibility, she whispered, "I thought I was improving the community." The judge replied coldly, "You destroyed it." A few weeks later, a journalist visited me for a follow-up interview. She asked, "If you could say one thing to Natalie Adams now, what would it be?" I thought for a long moment, watching a heron glide over the restored marsh. "I'd tell her that progress without respect isn't progress at all," I said finally. "It's vandalism," with a smile. She wrote that down word for word. By early summer, the lawsuits wrapped up. The HOA was dissolved, entirely replaced by a community association focused on environmental stewardship. The new bylaws required unanimous consent for any construction affecting natural land. They offered me a position on the new board. I declined. "I don't want to run anything," I said. "I just want the frogs to keep singing." One evening after the crews left and the sun dipped low, I walked the same trail where the highway once cut through. Grass was already sprouting through the mud. Water trickled where asphalt had choked it before. I stopped where Natalie had once posed for her ribbon-cutting photo, now just a patch of soft ground and reeds. The silence was peaceful again. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to forgiveness, not for her, but for myself. The fight was over. The water had spoken. 6 months later, the wetlands were alive again. The morning sun shimmered off the water like glass, and the reeds that had once been crushed under dump trucks now swayed gently in the breeze. The frogs had returned, loud, unapologetic, reclaiming their chorus. It was hard to believe that half a year ago this place had been ground zero for the worst flood in county history. Willowbend Estates, once a picture-perfect suburban community, now stood as a monument to hubris. Empty lots where houses once stood were being sold off to cover damages. The HOA had officially dissolved after the bankruptcy ruling. The county placed what was left of the organization under state supervision pending a full audit, the kind that digs up more than finances. I walked the same trail every morning, coffee thermos in one hand, drone controller in the other. Each flight recorded the slow healing of the land, the widening stream, the re-emerging cattails, the soft return of wildlife. Watching nature mend itself was better than any courtroom verdict could ever be. But there had been verdicts. The state attorney general had filed multiple criminal counts against Natalie Adams and her husband Paul: fraud, falsification of permits, reckless endangerment, and environmental destruction. The hearings stretched on for months, televised and dissected by pundits who alternated between outrage and disbelief. I attended the final sentencing in person. Not for vengeance, I wanted closure. The courtroom was packed, murmurs echoing under the high ceiling. Natalie looked nothing like the immaculate HOA president. I remembered her blonde curls had dulled to gray, her face pale and drawn. When the judge read the findings, she stared straight ahead, jaw tight. The defendants, Natalie and Paul Adams, are found guilty of multiple violations under the Wetlands Protection Act and Environmental Code 13 amperes. You are hereby sentenced to 18 months of probation community service, totaling 800 hours restitution of $1, $2 million to affected homeowners, and a personal fine of $150,000. The courtroom buzzed. Some gasped at the leniency, others whispered about the financial ruin that awaited her anyway. I just exhaled. The judge continued, "You will also be barred from holding any leadership position in a registered community association or real estate project for the next 10 years. That last line almost made me smile. When court adjourned, she looked up at me across the aisle. For a split second, our eyes met. She mouthed something, maybe, "I'm sorry, maybe, why me?" I couldn't tell. I nodded once, then turned and walked out. Some debts are beyond words. Back in Willowbend, cleanup had become community therapy. The county converted the destroyed highway into an official wetland restoration zone funded partly by state grants and, ironically, Natalie's restitution. They even hired me as a consultant. The new project wasn't about paving or profit. It was about rebuilding the natural floodplain, correctly shallow retention basins, native vegetation, permeable trails. No more asphalt. No more arrogance. At first, the surviving residents were quiet around me. Some still remembered the meetings, the arguments, the day I'd been mocked for warning them. But time and a good dose of humility has a way of softening pride. One afternoon, as we watched volunteers planting marsh grass along the water's edge, Mrs. Langley, a retired teacher who'd once voted for the road, approached me with a tray of seedlings. "I owe you an apology," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I thought you were just trying to stop progress." I smiled faintly. "You weren't wrong. I was stopping their kind of progress." She nodded. "Well, thank you for saving what's left of us." I helped her set the seedlings into the mud. "Nature does most of the saving," I said. "We just have to stop getting in the way." News outlets kept covering the story long after the court case ended. Environmental magazines called it the Willowbend lesson. Documentaries featured drone footage of the destroyed neighborhood juxtaposed with the thriving wetland today. Students from nearby universities came to study the recovery process. One article headline made me chuckle, "The man who let nature win." I didn't correct them. It wasn't me who won, it was the land. Even so, speaking invitations started pouring in. Town halls, environmental panels, local TV interviews. At first, I declined most of them. Talking about it felt like reopening an old wound. But Evelyn, my lawyer and by now close friend, convinced me otherwise. "Thomas," she said, "one afternoon over lunch, you're not just a witness anymore. You're an example. People need to know that standing your ground matters, even when it's just mud and reeds." She was right. So I started speaking not about revenge, but about respect. I told audiences about how fragile the balance is between land and law, how one bad decision in a boardroom can unravel an entire ecosystem. People listened. Some cried. Some laughed when I told them how an HOA once tried to fine me for unmaintained vegetation. Turns out I'd say that unmaintained vegetation saved an entire county from washing off the map. By autumn, the wetland was fully restored. The new community association, smaller, humbler, invited me to their first meeting. No PowerPoints, no slogans about progress. Just a handful of residents sitting in a circle in the rebuilt community hall, drinking coffee and planning how to care for the land together. The new president, Alice Monroe, was a biologist from the local college. Her first words set the tone, "We're not building roads anymore, we're building responsibility." I raised my mug to that. Weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. The penmanship was shaky but familiar. "Thomas, I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I thought leadership meant control. I see now it means stewardship. I'm working at a community garden in the city as part of my service hours. It's small, but I think I finally understand what you meant about balance. Natalie. I read it twice, then tucked it between the pages of my field journal. I didn't respond. Not because I was bitter, but because some apologies are complete in their silence. On the one-year anniversary of the flood, the county held a small memorial. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the restored marsh, laying flowers for what was lost, homes, possessions, illusions of control. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the still water and said, 16 months ago, people called this land useless. They said it was wasted space, something to pave over. But when everything fell apart, this place held the line. Nature doesn't take sides. it only responds. The real question is whether we're willing to listen. The crowd stood quietly, some holding hands, others nodding. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I walked the boardwalk that stretched across the heart of the wetland, built from recycled wood, low-impact, eco-certified. A heron glided overhead, wings wide, effortless. I stopped halfway, letting the breeze ripple through my shirt. The water below reflected the sky gold melting into blue. This was the same place where Natalie's highway had once stood, gleaming and arrogant. Now, it was a sanctuary again. And I realized something: the flood hadn't just washed away concrete and property lines, it had washed away illusions. Standing there, I thought of my father, who taught me how to read the land. The earth remembers, he used to say. You mistreat it, it'll remind you. You nurture it, it'll return the favor. He'd been right all along. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. The fight was over. Justice had come, not through anger or courts, but through balance restored. The wetlands didn't need vengeance. They just needed time and a little space to breathe. And so did I. In the end, what happened in Willowbend wasn't just about floods or property lines, it was about humility. We live in a world that teaches us to conquer, to control, to pave over anything that slows us down. But sometimes the strongest act of creation is restraint. The wetlands reminded me that nature is never the enemy our ignorance is. Every law ignored, every shortcut taken carries a cost. And when that bill comes due, no amount of concrete can hold it back. If there's one lesson I hope people take from this, it's this: progress without respect will always collapse under its own weight, so build wisely. Question arrogance. Protect what protects you, even when others don't understand. Because someday when the storm comes, you'll be glad you listened to the land. If you believe nature deserves a voice, and justice can flow like water, leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true HOA stories where karma meets consequence.